Welcome to Pivot Points, a new series featuring some of the world's most successful women, candidly sharing their stories and insights about how they made it to the top and how you can too. Hosted by Perry Yeatman, a straight-talking global executive and award-winning author who created the career and life of her dreams and now wants to help other ambitious women do the same.
Hi, this is Perry Yeatman, host of Pivot Points. My next guest is someone I recently met through a mutual friend. It took less than a cup of coffee for me to see why my friend had suggested we meet. She's pretty much had every senior role a person can have: president, CMO, COO, CEO, chairman, and board director. And many of these titles she's held at more than one organization. So I just knew right away she was someone who had insights and stories worth sharing. There are so many things to respect and admire about her, but the words that immediately come to mind for me are sharp, savvy, candid, and collegial. She's the kind of person you'd want to have on your team when it's third and long, and the kind of person you'd want to have a drink with after you've won the game. Her name is Mary Baglivo, and today she is the CMO of Northwestern University. She's also a board director for PVH, which is the global branded apparel company that includes Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger, and on the board of Host Hotels and Resorts, the world's largest lodging real estate investment trust. Mary, welcome.
Hi, Perry. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad you could make time for us today. So we know where you are and the incredible roles you've had along the way. But if you could take your mind back to the beginning, what was it, what job was it, what role was it that you think really launched you, and how did you get it?
Well, we're really going to go back in time in order for me to answer that question, because it was actually my first real full-time job after graduate school that was pivotal to the rest of my career. It became a great foundation, and I was actually there for a very long time. When I came out of graduate school, I joined an advertising agency, and I wound up staying with that company from my initial position as an assistant account executive all the way to leaving as the CEO some 17 years later. And I know that's almost unthinkable in today's environment. I guess it's just showing how long-term I am, but it really was the beginning and the arc of my career that got me into leadership. I chose that company because after graduating from Northwestern with my master's degree in what is now called Integrated Marketing Communications, I chose this agency for two reasons. One is that they offered me the position of being an assistant account executive on Procter & Gamble, and at that time in particular in the world of business, P&G was marketing finishing school, if you will, very substantial, very well-respected training ground. But maybe even more significantly, the agency was run by women. It had a woman CEO, a fantastic woman named Charlotte Beers, and that was very unusual back then, early 80s, but sadly it's still quite unusual. But she was very significant reason for me to join that firm.
Mm-hmm. And how did you, in those 17 years, presumably, to get to the top? I mean, you can't just sit in one position. You can't just be comfortable there. You have to continually stretch yourself, raise your hand. How did you kind of progress, or what would you say made you stand out so that they gave you opportunities to progress?
Well, it was a growth environment first and foremost, so that really helped a lot. So in the agency world, it's a new business world where you're constantly going out and trying to get new accounts and expand the the client roster of the organization. And because we had this newish dynamic leader that I'd mentioned earlier, Charlotte, and because we were in growth mode, we kept getting a lot of new business. So I was able to put my hand up and participate in new business by putting myself out there and being somewhat brave, but also by having leadership that wanted to give younger people opportunities, but frankly, because of the pace of growth, needed to. And if you, by having a rapid fire succession of what I would call horizontal experiences, which is one of the nice things about professional services firms, right? Because there's different categories of business, so from packaged goods to technology to retail to wine and spirits and beer, those sort of things, to the fact that each of those brands had different kinds of business challenges. So some were new product launches, some were brands that had gotten mature and tired and needed to be refreshed or repositioned, and some were those facing changing market dynamics or new kinds of customers. So I had a very broad set of experiences in a growth environment and just was able to gather experience fast, and by being courageous and confident enough to raise my hand for the next one and the next one and the next one, and working pretty hard, I was able to stand out and get opportunities.
Mm-hmm. You know, I want to bring something to listeners' attention from what you just said, which is, and I had this same experience. I tell a lot of people that, you know, consulting or the agency world, these are great places to cut your teeth for exactly the reason you just said, which is, first of all, it's a very kind of up or out system, right? And so you learn to be fast and professional and compete and, you know, be buttoned up and think on your feet and everything really quickly. You know, it's a high pressure environment, but it's a wonderful proving ground. And you also get this expanse of opportunity and your speed. You know, in a corporation, there's a lot, or really big other types of sector organizations, there's almost like a standard progression. You know, you kind of hold that job for 3 to 5 years and then you get considered for the next one, et cetera. But my experience in agencies and in consulting businesses is basically you move as fast as you are good enough to move. And so for those people who really do want to get ahead, I found those are wonderful, wonderful opportunities and training experiences. Would you agree with what I've just said? Because that's what it sounded like.
I absolutely agree with you. And there's also the factor, in addition to the good points you made, that the more you can take on and the more capacity you have, professional services organizations love that. It works for their business model, right?
Yep.
I will say, though, on the downside of it, if you will, the one thing that I didn't get as much of in that fast-forward environment, and because it's more of a lean and mean and less traditional environment, is a whole lot of training along the way. So
yep.
I was informally mentored. I learned a lot by watching others, both people in the agency world in which I work, but often my clients. And I just kind of learned as I went. It was more of an apprenticeship, frankly, than a well thought out training and education environment, and that's the trade-off, I think. So, but I couldn't agree more that it is a place to learn a lot and do a lot and get rewarded for so doing pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I think you've made an excellent point, and I would say to listeners, do think about how you thrive best. Because you're right, if you go to other types of organizations or corporations or industries, they have much more thoughtful, usually, training and development programs. And agencies and consultancies, a lot of it is on the job. So if that's what you like and you pick things up quickly that way, then that is great. But if you really don't do well in that environment, then you're probably right. It's probably best to try to find a different growth environment for you. Excellent. Okay, so that's how you began. Let's talk a little bit about the mid-career period. I happen to know you are married, you have children. As you were coming up, you were still holding very big jobs, global jobs, jobs in the client services fields. And so therefore, you know, ones with very unpredictable schedules and needs and everything else. How did you juggle between work and family? What choices or compromises did you make, trade-offs? Did you ever feel like throwing in the towel? Kind of talk to us about that period.
It was the hardest period, and it's the longest period, I would say, in most people's.
Great.
So get ready for those listeners who are approaching that or in it. I always am asked how I manage to juggle or handle it. And the first thing I will always say is that it is not easy. And anyone who says it is or is glib about that is probably not being honest.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was challenging every day.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled with the sometimes torment of wondering whether I was doing all I could for my children, my family, and also, frankly, was I doing all that I could for the business. And I can only say that I tried very hard to think about the most important priorities for each on a regular basis, and that's how I set my priorities and to-do list. So I often have said it was not a balance, but rather one big blended life. So I still do that to this day, although I will say the later part of the career is a whole lot easier, and because there's a lot less, in most cases, responsibility in other parts of your life. But I just try to do the most important things every day, mm-hmm. and that's how I made it work for me. But as I reflect on the question you asked, for me, I became another probably good point back to our discussion about agency life or consulting life. You can get to a pretty senior place pretty quickly. So I was my first CEO job, my first president and CEO job was before I was 40. Mm-hmm. I guess that's not that uncommon in tech and things like that today. So that meant in my life that's exactly when I had young children. Mm-hmm. And so I was learning on the job how to be the leader of an organization whilst learning how to be the leader, co-leader of a family. And, I look back on those days as being very hard, very exciting, never boring, that's for sure. but it just takes some real time management, project management, and prioritization skills.
I want to pick up on that because I too actually came up the agency route first. And so by the time I was probably 36 actually by the time I was even 30, I think I was a country head. Now it was Russia, so there, you had to go to Russia to get that job. But so I was a country head, and then I was a global managing director by the time I was probably 34, 35. And because of that, I actually had already had an amazing global career by the time I was 38. And so when I got pregnant at 38, I really felt like if I never did another thing in my whole life, I was good, right? Like I had done it and felt really positive about where I had gotten. So that is, again, for listeners, that is another track. When you have your kids and how you get where you get, any of them can work. I mean, any of the various choices. Some people have kids really early, some people in the middle, some people really late. Any of them can work depending on your circumstances. But that is another one of the advantages for being in a fast-paced industry, because you can get further faster. And then you can say, okay, now that I'm already here, now I want to focus on being a mom. And for me, at least, I then was never conflicted about whether being a mom or my career came first, even though there were many, 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 many days where I was choosing my career first and staying at the office late and whatever else. It was never this internal conflict for me that I think it would have been if I'd had my daughter at, say, 28, when I still I still felt like I had so much to prove in terms of my career. So thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you another question about on your way up. We all know that women, fair or not, and of course it's not fair, but women are more often harshly scrutinized than their male peers. And it's not just on performance, but it's on everything from looks to parenting to whatever. You were in an industry where there were a lot of women in the industry, but not a lot of women at the top. How have you felt scrutinized on your path? And if so, how did you handle it?
You're right that there are many women in the advertising business, still are. I think it's it's over 55% women, but in the C-level suite, it's still single digits, and that's awful. Yes, of course, I felt scrutinized, although because I believe I was so focused on just trying to get things done and do a good job, both at home and in my career, I probably benefited by not having the headspace or the time, if you will, to be really sensitive or over-analytical about it. Mm-hmm. I didn't think about career plotting and arcs of my career and next steps as much as my male counterparts in all likelihood did. And so they were plotting and conniving and scrutinizing and doing all the things that they do while I was just sort of
plowing ahead.
Going. And I actually sometimes think that my lack of sensitivity to that, or lack of paranoia perhaps, and I don't mean to be discouraging or critical of people who are more thoughtful about their careers. I often think if I had been more more strategic, I might have done better. But having said that, I was just going through it, and so I wasn't as aware. But what I will tell you is that there was obviously time spent among the men that I didn't spend. I don't know if it was because I had other priorities or if I wasn't invited. Maybe more the latter. Because I probably would have been savvy enough to not miss out on certain things, certain time spent among the men, certain unspoken decisions made among the men, and it was hard not to feel throughout my career at times as being a bit of an outsider, and that's just a really really tough thing, and I don't know the right advice on that as. Because if you're too pushy and, and I don't mean to use a derogatory word that people apply to women, and, so I mean that kind of with quotes around it, there are quotes around it, you also run the risk of, just not seeming like a good colleague. So, it's a very fine line to walk in terms of how to, have an appropriate agenda for your track for leadership to be appropriately considered for the next job, appropriately recognized and rewarded and compensated, and all of those things that are critical without seeming too demanding and too by the books, because there is this kind of collegiality often or clubbiness among the men that allows them to do those very things that I just mentioned in a way that seems more natural and more organic, perhaps. I hope that makes sense to you. Women kind of have to do it in a much more strategic way, and then that almost exasperates the problem of not being seen as, one of the fun people.
I know, I agree with you, and I actually, what I take from that, which I think is important, is that basically you didn't let whatever was going on that wasn't mission critical distract you. And I think that's actually a good lesson for women, because I think that a lot of people, we go in, we've got this very, when you and I were there wasn't a lot of political correctness, right? It just wasn't really a big topic. And so when we started out, and today it is. And so a lot of women are entering the workforce assuming that political correctness should follow through and that they have a right to be enraged by some of these things. And I'm not saying you don't have the right, but I think that one of the things that I am certainly seeing, and it happened in my career, and it sounds like it happened in yours, was if you don't let that completely distract you and overwhelm you and make you feel either disengaged or too enraged or whatever, you have a better chance of actually getting what you want. And we need more women to get to the top so that we can then just organically change the system and the culture.
I agree with you, and again, I'm not condoning, giving up on principle or
agreed.
Standards or allowing bad behavior to occur, doing anything that's not, absolutely, unblemished and stellar in your viewpoint. But I will say that to learn to get along with them and to play ball in the very best way. I mean that to figure out how to be friends with them, without, compromising, really does allow you to figure out how to succeed and therefore set up a better situation for the women to come. So I thought that I was a pretty good advocate all along for the women that were behind me and very principled. For myself, I wasn't, beating down the door on my own agenda, my own career. I did it a little more on behalf of the others, but I figured out a way to just kind of get in there with them and not be devastated by feelings of exclusion or things like that. It's interesting, though. I don't know if it all turned out well enough for me. These problems are really still very much out there. I remember a point in my career, not to jump too far ahead, but I guess it would still be, maybe it's not, maybe I'm moving into past the middle, but there was a point in time where I was a CEO of the biggest region. We had 3 CEOs, one the Americas, that was myself, so that was the U.S., Canada, Latin America, and multicultural agencies, and then someone doing Asia and Africa and the Middle East, and then someone running Europe. So my region at the time was the biggest and the most successful, the most profitable. And I had a dinner with the global CEO, and he told me he was thinking about succession planning, and he was considering the other 2 guys and not me. And I said, why not me? He said, I didn't think you'd want it.
Oh, exactly.
Now, that says a lot more about him, and we can talk later about that if you want, but than me, perhaps. But probably part of that's on me, right? Because I was so busy doing the job, getting the results, that I probably wasn't agenda setting with him, clearly enough.
Well, and you're not alone on that. I will tell you that the research I did for my first book back in 2007 made it very clear that the number one reason women didn't get international assignments is because they hadn't raised their hands clearly enough, and they weren't even put on the slate because the men, who were mostly men making the decisions about who the slate would even be, said, oh, she wouldn't want it. She's married, or she has kids, or, whatever. So you weren't even in the consideration set. And that's why I do say, I think today, you've got to advocate for yourself and be very candid and straightforward about what you want, because otherwise other people are going to make assumptions, and the chances are very great that they are going to be wrong. Excellent advice. Question, I want to move on to the transition period. So I know you have gone from business to academia now. And I'm curious, even really confident, capable women can get nervous or unsettled when they make a big transition like that. How did you, I don't know whether you were nervous about this one, but in general, when you've made transitions, how did you get past that? Or what would you say to someone who's about to make a major career transition or to create a second act? What advice would you give them?
To do it. For me, it's been really spectacularly interesting. The reason this happened for me or to me is I had been on the board of trustees at Northwestern when I was CEO at Saatchi. When President Shapiro came on board, he was looking to diversify his board of trustees a bit in terms of regionality, and I would probably imagine gender and also skill set. And so he asked me to meet his board. I was on the board, and therefore I got some glimpses into what people, great researchers and faculty do in university environments, and I really thought it was important and fascinating. And so when Northwestern created their first ever chief marketing officer role, I think shockingly to some, raised my hand to be considered in the search, and that's how it happened. And I have found it to be a really tremendous opportunity to reapply my skill set as a marketer and a CEO to a more purposeful, important environment in my mind, which has also got a lot of just inherent interest, value, and excitement for me because it's a whole new world, and I'm meeting new kinds of people, and I have new kinds of colleagues, and I just find it very, very fascinating and interesting. So I guess my advice is if you see something in the course of your experiences that seems interesting and potentially more satisfying, or at least just a different angle in life where you think that you can add value based on your experience and skills, go for it. I think it's pretty interesting. You have to be ready to be humble, though. I knew going into this world, and the academy is known for being very different and very interesting and a bit, I don't know the right word, but it's kind of sacred almost. And so I knew that if I went in as, hey, I'm the CEO and I'm here to tell you how to do branding and marketing, I was going to be rejected like a foreign particle. But if in fact, and it was inherently true for me, that I expressed interest and fascination in the work they do and tried to find out how I might help amplify, accelerate that, that would be a better way to get engaged and get some relationships and respect built, and hence a platform for doing some good work. That's how I did it. But some people have tried to make that kind of transition. I just came back actually yesterday from a large conference, the marketing of higher education, and some people that transfer from industry. By the way, they call everyone from the business world, no matter whether you were an actuary or a roofing contractor or an ad agency CEO like myself. It doesn't matter, you're from industry. It's great. Some people don't make the transition positively, but I think I was ready to do something that was more interesting and purposeful for me, and ready to really kind of be humble about in the way I approached it.
Mm-hmm. Hence why I called you savvy. There we go. Smart and savvy, no doubt about it. We often hear that it's lonely at the top. I'm thinking now of kind of where you are. And, we were just talking about how crazy busy your life is. But it's even more so lonely for women. So what is your support system, and how did you create and maintain it?
I thought that's probably the most difficult question for me to answer. It's similar to a question I often get in these kinds of talks about, what do you do for recreation, right? And I went,
Yeah,
what?
Let me think about that.
But actually, I have a lot of fun. I overpack my life, right? But I'm trying to think. I wish I had a more maybe formal or well thought out support network, perhaps of other professional women or better advisors, if you will. I was kind of never devoting or in my mind at the time, willing to sacrifice any time away from my kids or my job to do much networking or anything really therapeutic. I mean, sounding a little bit like a martyr. I don't mean to, but that would have been good for me, right? And so I would really actually recommend to others that they think about a little professional network or a support group that's actually, organized a bit. I had friends at work, both men and women, but my friends at home in my other part of my life generally were not professional women who had big, busy, powerful careers. And that's not to say, my friends had wonderful, a lot of them had part-time jobs or, worked as counselors or this or that. Really respectful, wonderful work, but they didn't have the P&L time, travel pressures that I did. And in a certain sense, they were a great support system for me because they kept it real. They never really understood what I did. They often said, why do you do what you do? But just the fact that they didn't want to talk, frankly, about issues of succession or management or whatever the big topics in business were at the time, it was kind of therapeutic for me. And I think I really benefited from just being able to truly let my hair down. Yeah. And, maybe that's why I didn't build as strong a professional network and rather enjoyed being just one of the moms, and it was great. And now in this role, now that I am in this stage of my life, I actually have a group of women at the university, and we do. There's about 8 of us, and we get together and we have these wonderfully therapeutic dinners together, and we get to talk about things that are happening in the university. And it's really, really good, and we do support each other more formally. But it's interesting coming through. I didn't really, but I will say, people that have no clue what you're doing are sometimes the best people to be around.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, it's funny. I stepped down from craft at about the same time we moved to Annapolis, and I realized, like, on the North Shore of Chicago, if you work for Kraft Foods, at the top, it is very hard to run into, it's very hard to go out on the North Shore of Chicago and not run into at least somebody that you know, right? So, like, every time you're leaving your house, you're thinking, okay, am I ready to run into, a colleague or somebody who works for me or whatever? So when I moved here, and I just became Kirsten's mom, right? And because I don't have, even today, 4 years later, I don't have a single client. I don't have any professional relationships in Annapolis. There's just not one. And so I can walk around in what my daughter calls my quote unquote indoor-outdoor slippers, like these Uggs, right? And stuff. And I'm just like, doing my thing. And you're right. Nobody understands what I actually do. Nobody really cares. They all just say, oh, that's Perry. She's very smart. She's got this big global thing. I don't know. Right. But
right.
I am purely Kirsten's mom. And it actually is very freeing. And I love being Kirsten's mom. So it's all good. But I actually think that was you fell into it. You might not have planned it, but it was a brilliant support system because it lets you, as you said, put your hair down and feel very comfortable and not be talking business every 5 seconds. So excellent. Just a couple questions left. I'm mindful of time. One is, I don't know a single successful woman who didn't have to overcome some bad breaks or big failures on the way to the top. Since it obviously didn't derail you, would you be willing to share one of the most difficult or outrageous things that happened to you, and how did you handle it?
Oh, there were a bunch of them. I'm trying to think of which one to talk about. This one, because it maybe a little more constructive. So when I left that first job that we had originally talked about and went to New York, it's actually because I'm from the East Coast and I wanted to get back, but that mentor who had been the CEO before me at that other place had gone on to have this extraordinarily successful career, and she was in a big new job, and she asked me to, come there with her, and I made the move, and it turned out that it was a mistake of a place for both of us. And so she went to work at the State Department for Colin Powell, but I didn't have that opportunity. So instead, I went to do what I thought would be an entrepreneurial moment, if you will, and I was asked to be the president of this independent small agency holding company. And I went over there to do that. It seemed great to me, and this is unfortunately in 2001. And a lot of things started to go bad. Here's three. One, the dot-com crash. Secondly, I found out with the significant investors that the company had from Switzerland who had a huge stake in the company that the CEO and his CFO had really kind of painted a false picture of the stability of the company and its financial footing to the investors and me. So we were in a big lot of trouble. And then 9/11 happened, and it was just terrifying. So as it turns out, here I was supporting my family, thought I was actually in a money moment, and all of a sudden became extremely vulnerable. The investors got rid of the CEO and said, we've decided to, we'd like to, take the company apart, and we'd like you to go sell it off, if you will. And so here's me, a marketer, a consumer insight person, a creative, who is now going to be the front person on attempting to sell the assets of this company, which included a media company, some ad agencies, et cetera, et cetera. And what was good about it, even though it was terrifying, is that it turned out that I learned that some of the skills were really, instead of being completely daunted and saying no, I thought, well, maybe if I know about clients and I know about marketing, and I know the agency world, I can find thoughtful matches, and I will go and visit these people. And I was pretty successful at either helping the original owners to get their companies, to buy them back, or in many cases to find a match or a sale for these units, and one was really wonderful because I had this ad agency that was based in D.C., and I didn't know really what to do with it, so I did some research on what other big agencies have offices in the D.C. area, and maybe I'll get that person to buy this one and merge them together. This is about as sophisticated as my logic is at this point in time. So I call upon a wonderful man named Ed Eskandarian, who's the chairman CEO of Arnold in Boston, who has an office in Washington, and I pitched this idea to him. And not only does he say yes, and he winds up doing that. That company's still going. He says he's the only one who is, I talked to hundreds of people. He said, ooh, if you're successful at doing what you're doing, you're going to put yourself out of a job. And I said, that's right. And he said, well, we just bought this agency in New York City that really needs a fresh new CEO, and Procter & Gamble's one of their key clients. You should go do this. And that's how I wound up getting to my next job, which was a wonderful job, the CEO of Arnold Advertising. But I guess, from a total trauma to a really good outcome, and I think it was just really about having some faith in your skill set and your basic ability to solve problems and try something new, and it worked out in my case.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. It is a great story, and you're right. I mean, everybody's going to land with, at some point, you're going to have made a misstep, and you don't always know it, and it's not always of your own doing. It's just going to happen, and you've got to be able to figure your way out of it, whatever that may be. So, well done to you, and thank you for sharing. So I'm in the fun, we're going to move to what I call the fun round. So these are just some quick answers to questions that aren't directly related to career advice, but I think are kind of interesting for listeners to know. So the first one is, if you could have a superpower roundtable with other women, a few other women, alive or dead, who would they be and why?
So I think that I would invite some women who not only have had great careers themselves, but more importantly have had the opportunity to travel extensively and interview lots of the world's greatest people. So I would think that Doris Kearns Goodwin and Diane Sawyer and Barbara Walters would have so many. I think the multiplier effect of all the people that they've interviewed, talked to, written about, and traveled with, I think would be fascinating.
Cool. I like that. That's very original. Well done. And I agree with you. I think who haven't they talked between them? Who haven't they talked to? So they would have just an unbelievable amount of insights. What is it you're most looking forward to?
Traveling more, which sounds really terrible right now that I'm just, I travel a couple times a week for work now, and I'm always on delayed planes, and I said I hate airports more than anything in the world, but the time in my life when I can travel for fun, for long trips, interesting, India and the rest of Asia and, Egypt and Africa, that kind of thing.
Yep. I have actually done all of those, and I do strongly recommend them. What's the one question I haven't asked you that you would want me to ask you?
That is, that's hard. I think one would be back to the motherhood and careers together. I like to offer some what I call practical tips to younger women on how some good strategic tips on how this balancing act thing can be done. So here's one for you. When you are asked to volunteer at the school, I know this is going to sound really funny, but hear me out on this one, because this is really, really good. You must always remember that you want to be child-facing, and because you want more time with your kid, right? And in addition to the volunteering credits, and you don't want to go to another meeting. So I just always remember, this is kind of funny. I when I was a younger parent, I decide I'm going to go to the board meeting of the nursery school or something like that, and I'm sitting there in a meeting room. Bad decision. I go to more meetings. They love meetings. They don't get to go to meetings. I go to 200 meetings a week. So here I am in a meeting, and they want to talk about this. They say, we're trying to decide whether to provide free babysitting for the moms that go to the Moms and Tots with their toddler. And I say, excuse me, do we have an admissions issue? Are we fully enrolled? Oh, my God, we've got waiting lists for years. And I say, why would we offer free babysitting? And they look at me like, you horrible strategic. This isn't it wasn't in an underprivileged neighborhood. Okay, so I should have said that first. But at any rate, I thought, note to self, no meetings. Go serve the pizza. You don't want to be anybody's boss. You want to be the worker in this case, and it just always works and works and works. And the other thing is, ask the teacher at the child conference, do you notice any effect of my being a full-time working parent on the kids or in my participation level? And I did every year. And inevitably they would say, we see you as much, if not more. And it's very reassuring to have that come from a third party.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. That is great advice. And I'm so glad that you did bring that up. Okay, we're on the last question. And it's two different questions. You can answer them both if you want, or you can pick. But it's, if you could do it all again, what advice would you give your younger self? Or what is the best piece of career advice you ever received?
I'm going to pick the first one, and not surprising given where I am now, I would have given myself more education, whether it was in the form of more formal professional development or executive MBA programs, or, put my hand up and say to those men in charge, hey, I'd like to be sent to the Kellogg Business School retreat. I didn't want to say Harvard Business School on this call.
Good decision. Good decision.
But I think I could have, if I was a little more thoughtful about educating myself and my own career development, that I wouldn't have detracted such significant amount of time from my family or my job that it would have been bad. It would have actually been helpful, because I think I would have learned how to even be more effective, efficient, and goal-oriented. So I think it would have been worth a little bit of the investment, and I wish I'd done more of that.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I'm going to add to that, because I think it's a great piece of advice, particularly today, given how much education is available in so many different forms and formats, right? I mean, it's the price point. There's different price points and there's different delivery formats. And between them, I believe that you can get what you need. But the reason I also think it really would have mattered, and it would have mattered for me too, and I'll share a quick story. So we were coming back on the company plane after having completed the Cadbury acquisition, and there were only a couple of us on the company jet at the time. And everybody, I won't mention the other two people, but one of them was talking about how their daughter was just getting ready to apply to MBA school. And the CEO turned to me and she said, Perry, I never asked, where did you get your MBA? And I was like, because I didn't get an MBA, because I was a literature major. And everything else I learned on the job. And so she's like, okay, so, I'm helping write financial press releases and dealing with Wall Street. And, I'm doing all of the, we did every single major transformational activity that could have happened to a company happened to Kraft Foods in the 7 years that I was there. So new CEO, global reorganization, global restructuring, 7 multi-billion-dollar deals, hostile takeover. I mean, you name it, splits, spins, all. And yet I had never actually had formal business education. And what I think really mattered about that was not that I hadn't learned it on the job, because actually I had, and I'd read on weekends and I'd read books and I got I will say the word Harvard Business Review and whatever, but it was actually my confidence. I think the real thing about getting more education is that for women, you can then feel early on more confident that at least on base knowledge, you know what the heck you're talking about. And so I think that since confidence has been such an issue for a lot of women, it's really great to do that. So I love that piece of advice. And I, myself, I often say to the dean of the Kellogg School of Management, if I could do it all again, boy, I would certainly have gone to Kellogg. But there you go. Mary, Thank you so much for your time. I know how hard it is to get a few minutes with you, and I think it's just been really great, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. So thank you.
Oh, it was a pleasure talking with you, Perry.
You've been listening to Pivot Points, a series designed to help ambitious women have the careers and lives of their dreams. To hear more interviews, go to www.yourcareeryourterms.com. And be sure to tell us what you think. If there are topics you'd like covered